Hey there, this is Ed Keating, co-founder and chief data officer at Cannabiz Media, and I am back for another quarterly update on what's happening with licenses and license counts as we track them month to month. So let's get started. First, we'll sort of hit the summary overview, and based on our count, we've seen regulators add over 1,300 licenses in Q2. And in comparing them to the number of licenses out there, really not much has changed. There was not any great increase or decrease overall. But when we look at the different activities, we'll see some movement. So, and as we highlight here, stores were actually up 7.6%. Probably not a surprise to most who are following this. Manufacturing, no change. And then cultivation down 8%. So I think for most of us who follow this space, that's probably not all that surprising. So as we said, there's 1,313 new licenses that we counted in Q2. And here's the breakdown. So 574 cultivators, 152 manufacturers, and 587 store slash dispensaries. So, not a huge number, and we'll compare and show what this year has looked like in terms of license issuance. So here's the sort of eye chart table that will give you a little bit of background in terms of what was issued in terms of total active licenses. So you can see that the number hasn't changed all that greatly from 42,745 to 41,600. So I think it's about 1,000 difference across, over 40-some thousand licenses. But one thing that we're sharing really for the first time in these presentations is we're also showing facilities. So what Cannabiz Media does is we strive to go in and look at the licenses and determine which ones are joined together because they're at the same location and have the same owner. So the notion is we're trying to understand really the number of businesses that are out there, which is different than just a license because, well, the license we think is a great proxy for how the industry grows and shrinks. The facilities move a little bit less slowly because let's say if there's a farm and they get rid of some of their licenses, they're still a farm. So you'll see this column throughout the remaining presentation as we touch on specific activities. So for those of you who like to look at it visually, this is really the same look here. It just provides a little bit more. And as we said, total licenses have declined slightly, but they're kind of masked by changes in the different categories. Whereas we saw at the outset, grow was down, stores are up. So now we're going to take a look at the three big license categories, and we'll start with manufacturing. So in Q2, we saw that 14 states issued licenses, and I think the headline, second point, is there were 152 licenses were issued in Q2 compared to 365. That's down 58%. But anybody who's a student of license counts in the US is probably going to know why. While California and Washington led, Oklahoma was really nowhere to be found in the second quarter. And you can see here that this year they issued 235 in quarter one and only 5 in quarter two. I mean, it's quite a big change. Even though their moratorium started last September, it's really been kicking in, and we covered that in the blog posts we did after the quarter ended on the specific activities. I mean, we've really seen how this works out. And then this shows graphically what new manufacturing licenses were issued, sort of how that has changed throughout. And you can see back in January and February, it was still pretty active. States, especially Oklahoma, was cranking out licenses, and now, as we get into Q2, it's a much lower set of licenses being issued. And here is the table that really shows the same thing, but it gives you the real numbers. And once again, you can see the numbers didn't really change greatly. 6194 to 6189, that's the same. And really the true on facilities as well. So And then finally, here's total manufacturing licenses and total facilities. A visual of, there's no real trend line to draw here. It would be pretty straight if we looked at it. So not a lot of movement there. Now let's move on to cultivation. So there were 574 licenses issued in Q2 versus 630 by our count. That's a decline of about 9%. Oklahoma's share of all the new licenses issued, so keep that in mind, these are new license issues, they accounted for 54% in Q1 and dwindled all the way down to 1.4% in Q2. So, that's just a giant change. And with all the news coming out of the state, all the information about the challenges they've had with enforcement, black market, they know they've got a challenge there to take care of. And it seems like they're really putting a lot of effort to it. And then finally, just where these licenses come from, and 75% came from California, Michigan, Vermont, and Oregon, even, which is sort of odd since they also have a moratorium. But I think some licenses are still working their way through the process, or at least that's what my team has shared with me. This next slide I'm going to put up shows how many new cultivation licenses have been issued by month for probably about 18 months or maybe more. You can see here, this one, it's easy to draw the line. The trend is pretty straightforward. We've definitely, I think, September 2022, this was in Oklahoma when it was moratorium time, and people must have just papered the licensing office with applications and their $2,500 checks. But we can see now that this has really, really come down. And, given the challenges with oversupply, really not a surprise that we see this here in new licenses. And we often say that licenses are a lagging indicator of everything because there's paperwork. It's not something that happens immediately. But you can see here, there's definitely been a trend in place that goes back pretty far as cultivators and businesses try and figure out what is the right balance in terms of supply. So if we were to once again look at the table view, you can see here definitely a change where total cultivation licenses are down by our estimate about a little over 10.5%, about 2,500 licenses from about a year ago. And then you can see here the change from December, where it's a high of 22,000 and then just under 21,000. And we also have the notion of the facilities here, where they are also declining, but not as much. I think it's more been in some cases a shrinkage of farms, at least in some of the states. In other cases, the facility is simply one plot, and that's all that we've got. So now let's take a look at stores, which is probably the category we get the most questions about. And we have a lot of customers who track this information. So there were 587 new store dispensary licenses issued. And once again, the theme continues. Oklahoma only issued 11 store licenses in Q2 versus 332 in Q1. And this time, New York minted almost 33% of Q2's new licenses. And, when New York issues them, they pretty much come out as active, even though we all know that the doors aren't open. They might not even have a place yet, but we go by what the state says. They are really our source of truth. So trying to look at this nationally is a little tough on this slide. This is truly the eye chart slide because it covers all the states that have issued this year. And there's certainly a lot. But we published this. It's actually in one of our blog posts that we put out right after the quarter ended. So if anybody needs it, it's there, or our emails will be shown at the end. To take a look at total licenses, this is a pretty important one. You can see here that the active store licenses were 11,407 at the beginning of the year, and now they're up to 12,279. So we see licenses up by 7.6%. And facilities up by 8.1%. So definitely some interesting movement there, as that's one place where we're seeing some growth. Somebody's asked us, how many licenses does an average facility own? It's a great question. I know when we looked at California specifically, it looked like each facility had at least 3 licenses. But I think the reason for that is just kind of the law of averages. There's a handful that have 2 and 300 licenses, and then there's a bunch that have 1. So saying it's 2 or 3 might not be all that illuminating, but it's a good question, certainly for further research. And cultivation is going to be way different than, let's say, stores, where it's typically only going to be 2, and it's going to be in those states that make you get a medical and a rec license. So, good question. We need more data though, so we'll get back to you on that one. And then this is what it looks like, visually, for those who kind of appreciate seeing it this way in terms of how the numbers have grown, and we can see that it's definitely increased and is likely to continue so as more states come on board. I do want to touch a little bit more on Oklahoma. I know it comes across as a bit of an obsession, but it was such the tour de force of licenses from 2018 on that it is, I think, important to see, because I know many ancillary companies spent a lot of time and effort trying to penetrate that market. So in terms of what happened in Q2, for stores, they only issued 11 licenses versus 332. Cultivation 8 versus 338, and manufacturing 5 versus 235. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It's like 900 licenses versus 22. I'm not going to do the math that fast, but it's a big drop off. And pulling some of the data now from our intelligence database, you can see here that the green are the licenses that were issued. So just total that were issued going back the last 12 months. But the blue is the net changes. And as you can see, it was going up here for a while, almost till February of this year, where it tended to be positive in some months. But now, as we look to 2023, later, certainly into the second quarter, we can see that the number of licenses in that state is shrinking. And I think with all the work that OMA and OBNDD are doing, the 2 regulators there, among others, law enforcement, I think we're going to see even more of that. So that's sort of the overview of what's been happening in terms of number of licenses and facilities and how they've changed. I want to just touch on some of the drivers for that, or at least what we see as some of the drivers. So we talked about moratoriums, and those are always interesting rules for states to enact. Montana has one where the adult use industry will remain closed off to new entrants for at least 2 years. I think that goes out a bit. I think there's at least another year and a half or so on that one. And then Oregon has one in place as well, although, as I showed before, they still are issuing some licenses. And then Oklahoma's is probably the biggest and most profound. But there's also some rule changes. So we've had some clients ask us about what's going on in California, what drives that decline. And we did some research and looked at the number of large licenses. So when California enacted its licensing scheme, large licenses were not going to be issued until January 2023. And in Q1, I think 2 were issued, although they seem not even to stay open or stay active. However, in Q2, we had about 26 that were issued. And what that allowed these facilities to do is essentially shrink the number of licenses they had. They didn't need to have 20 or 30 or whatever. They could say, hey, we have a large license, and put them under that one umbrella. So it does shrink the number of licenses. And in the blog post we did, I think we actually came up with a number and showed the farms that actually had employed these to bring down the license count. But I imagine it makes their record keeping a little bit easier. Not sure about the licensing cost, but that may be on a case by case basis. So definitely an interesting challenge there. And then just following the news, which we all see every morning, what's going on in the state. So I just saw this week that Alabama unissued and then reissued a whole bunch of licenses. So that causes all sorts of confusion in the marketplace. New York has yet another lawsuit that's put their system on pause. And then this morning I woke up here in my home state of Connecticut to a lawsuit that is being filed down in Stanford, where they're trying to say that the whole program should be thrown out because cannabis is federally legal and it's a bad thing and it shouldn't be in the state. So another day, another lawsuit, but I expect to see this to continue as more states try and enact this and move things forward. The last area I want to focus on is a different kind of leaderboard. So over the summer, we launched unlicensed licenses and have come up with a leaderboard of where we found them. We've been researching the unlicensed market for a lot of reasons. One, to just try and understand it. How big is it? Where are these businesses located? Right now, we've gathered over 1,000, I think, and we have several thousand more in the queue. The exciting thing for us is 3/4 of this data is derived from government sources. So, and we've only focused on California, New York, and DC, but there's a lot of information out there. If you think about it, many of these businesses, do need to attract customers so that they do have a public face in some ways. But we've also worked to try and find information through regulators and others, just so that our users can map and understand, where might these businesses be, and what does that mean for our customers? What does it mean from a compliance standpoint? I know that one of our salespeople was showing this feature to one of the prospects, and the person said, "Oh, that guy reached out to me and he wanted to use our services, but he couldn't produce a license, so we didn't go with him." So, it's definitely, I think, going to be illuminating as people see who these licenses are and where they are. And on the right side of the screen, here's a map in New York of Noise NYC. And the fascinating thing is that this is like a single state operator. I don't know if they actually may be an MSO if they've gone into another state, but here they've got not one store, but a handful of stores. So it's really a force here, and it's an information challenge for us, but one that we've learned a lot about the industry, and it's interesting to see how each of the regulators across the country are going to manage this. So we'll be doing more reporting on this as well. We know we'll never get all this information. There's just too much of it. However, there's a lot of data that our team has been able to find by a lot of judicious digging. So I wanted to pass along our contact info. If you do have any questions, you can reach out to us, and I'm also happy to take any additional questions that you all might have today. All right. Well, it's looking like there aren't a lot of questions coming in. So as I said, you've got my email here, and happy to take any questions. Oh, it looks like one snuck in under the wire here. So if you run into stores that have a license in one state but are unlicensed in another one, I can't think of an example where somebody has pulled that off. And I don't know if that means has an illicit store someplace else, but I don't know if that's happened. I have heard of cases where growers have a legit license and are selling product out the back door as well. And that's happened in a couple times, mostly in California. And I do know that there have also been cases here in Connecticut where people have been shut down for selling cannabis, even though they had what I'm calling an adjacent license. So in addition to tracking these 1,000 illicit stores, there's also quite a few vendors who have licenses that allow them to sell vapes or tobacco. And some of them sort of skirt the law and try and sell cannabis cartridges, THC cartridges for those vapes. So here's a case where they have a legitimate business and an unofficial illegitimate one. But the two cases I've seen in Connecticut have resulted in sting operations where people got shut down. But I think we all know that for every one you find, there's a lot that you'll probably never find. So great question, and we expect to see, sadly, probably more of that as we continue to research the other side of the marketplace. All right. Well, if you have any additional questions, Don't hesitate to reach out and look for our next blog post at the end of Q3, where we'll see how these moratoriums have held and also how the market is able to move ahead. Thank you.